everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Independent Thought. My name is Desmond Price. And for today's episode, we are joined by Conor Halbleib, who is running for Congress out of Kentucky's 5th District. Conor, thank you for coming on the show today. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me, Desmond. I'm doing quite well. How about yourself?
Great. I mean, it is not every day that I get to talk to somebody who is running for Congress. I have talked to quite a few of these people, but not
Hmm.
every day.
Right.
So I'm always intrigued, by people who have the ability to put themselves out there and to go and just, try to run for office, especially during this tumultuous time where it feels like the country is in a really divisive place. And when I heard about your race in particular, you're a Democrat running in a red state in a red district. Now, obviously, I want to get into it with you about like specifics on the issues, like how you feel on gas prices, inflation, marijuana legalization, but we're going to ask you a bunch of different questions here. But I want to start off with just like the elephant in the room here. When you're running in a race like this, and you most definitely are going to have to reach out to Republican voters as a Democrat in order to probably get enough votes to win. How do you approach that political divide in this climate? Like, how do you reach across these people and say, hey, I am of a different party, but let me speak to you about X, Y, and Z? Like what does that look like?
That's a great question, and it's definitely a challenge and one that I have had to think about as I run this race. And I think, a couple things is first of all, I believe in my ideas. I think if you don't believe in your ideas, it's going to be very hard for you to convince other people of your ideas. So I think that's number one. And number two is to really just focus on issues that affect everyone. I have my own personal beliefs about all sorts of issues, but I really focus my campaign about the issues that would affect someone no matter if they're a Democrat or Republican. And we could talk about those, but it be things such as healthcare and water and things that aren't necessarily don't necessarily care about if you're a Democrat or Republican. So if you focus your campaign on certain issues, while also messaging, that you have your own personal beliefs on a whole bunch of things, uh, people respect that. So uh, I think that's the main thing is just keep your messaging and keep your campaign focused on what would impact everyone. It doesn't matter if they're Democrat or Republican, and believe in your ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a really strange place we find ourselves in right now. We keep, some people want to say like, oh, it's not as bad as we say it is, but truthfully, we are going through a very divisive time, right? And when you increase that with what's happening online, like social media algorithms have us all in our little bubbles. And so we only see, similar beliefs. We see all of our friends who are also liberal or all of our friends who are also conservative. So we're all in this box believing that everyone thinks the way that we do because we don't have to interact with the other side. So when you're on the ground interacting with people who identify as independent, conservative, Republicans, what is one of the misconceptions that you think that people on the left have in regards to people who are on the right? Like what is like the common thing that you see that you're just like, oh yeah, this is just vastly misrepresented when when we're hearing about people on the right in the media?
Well, um, I think it's just a misconception of degree. People who are on the right do have different beliefs than I do about a lot of things and things that I wouldn't necessarily agree with and things I would definitely not support. But that's not what they think about all the time. Those issues are a little more to the edge of their minds than people would believe. So if I'm talking to someone and they bring up something about January 6th, I have my beliefs about January 6th and they have theirs, but it rarely ever comes up. More things come up about their kids sick, or more things come up about how like they're stressed at their job. I mean, people everywhere, talk about the same thing. I think online, the kind of our more not fringe, but our ideas that we don't discuss in our day to day, they come up more. So people think that that's all we talk about. Uh, whereas in person, if you talk to someone, they're your neighbors, they're your friends, your relatives. So disagreements come up. I'm not afraid to even talk to some of my constituents and be very strong about passionate about my personal beliefs. But most of the time, it's the day to day issues. It's the issues that wouldn't get a lot of attention online, and those issues come up a lot more in person. So I think it's more of a I disagree with them with conservatives a lot, but our disagreements don't come up as much. It's more of the day to day issues.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. I live in a red state myself, so I'm asking you some of these questions, but I kind of already know some of the
Hmm.
answers. It's truthfully, it's interesting how much there is like connecting us versus dividing us. Well, we never focus on these things. That's not really how online discourse goes. And we're so increasingly online as a nation. I feel like it's kind of hard to separate that sometimes. So I think it's important to continue to talk about how there is not really that much of a polarization like in real life as we see online. But kind of talking about, this like one step further. When you are out talking to people, in Kentucky, maybe you're speaking with somebody who is, slightly, differing than you as far as, political ideology is concerned. What is an issue that comes up that you find that people, I guess, like who are Republican might actually agree with you more on than, I guess, national media would understand?
Right, and this is kind of getting into you know what I base my campaign on. I think I could talk about healthcare, and we could talk about that later. And I'm very progressive when it comes to healthcare. I believe in Medicare for all. But the real issue that brings both Republicans and Democrats, no matter what, together, no matter where I go, is the issue of water. In a lot of places in Eastern Kentucky, um, they s- there still is not clean drinking water that comes out of the tap, and so that is an issue that doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. You don't want to see brown water come out of your tap. And Eastern Kentucky just got hit with some very severe floods, and we could talk about that. But even before then, that was the issue that I think resonated the most with the biggest group of people, which is just I think it's I think it's unacceptable that in 2022 there are still places in this state and in this country that don't have access to clean drinking water. And that has been the issue that has brought both Republicans and Democrats together.
So let's go a little bit into the flood now. Now, you've talking about this, in prior conversations that you and I had about the fact that there has been flooding in Eastern Kentucky. What exactly, like led up to this? Was there kind of like a breakdown in infrastructure, or what could have been done, I guess, by the government to prevent this level of flooding? And what do you think needs to happen going forward to make sure that something like this can't be happen again? And also like speak to like what needs to happen as far as cleanup is concerned to make sure people have access to water. Give me some of your thoughts on that.
Right. So the flooding is very it's interesting in a lot of ways. Some people who are conservatives, they'll talk about how this is a once in a generation flood, so we shouldn't think of it as something that's going to happen all the time. And they're right; it's a once in a generation flood. But that once in a generation flood was exacerbated by policies and by decades of especially strip mining policies that caused, normally when there's a flood, water. What you're worried about is water levels gradually rising. You see in your basement as the water fills in your basement. And that's horrible, and that's no fun. And that could be a terrible flood. The problem with this flood is that you didn't just have a gradual increase in water. You had a huge influx of a wave of water because there was no natural kind of absorption left in the community. The hills, the mountains, and the valleys have all been strip mined to a point to where none of the land could take any of the water. So instead, you had a huge influx of water coming down hills and coming down mountains that basically slammed into communities much more rapidly than even a large, even just a standard large flood, which meant that people couldn't get out in time, especially older people or people with disabilities or things like that. Is that there was no time to react. So I think what a government response would do would say, "Hey, we're not going to put people in a position to where when there is a once in a generation flood, which I think you and I will agree is going to happen more and more as climate change impacts communities. These once in a generation floods are going to happen once every 5 or 10 years, and we need to put it in a position to where if this happens, it's not going to completely devastate a community to a point of no return. And that might mean environmental policies, or might mean regulations that mean we can't just strip mine a community to where there's no natural kind of barriers to natural disasters. So I think that's the big thing. Is that yes, it was a uncommon flood, but it was exacerbated by policies that meant that the land um, could not alleviate any of the problems.
Absolutely. It's very important to talk about like how these policies that happen that we almost never think about, like how they truly do affect people, because these are the moments where those who are running for office need to truly step up. This is when people need them the most. And also we're recording this at the end of August. This will probably come out in like a week or so. What we saw happen in Jackson, Mississippi this week as well. These kind of things are happening more and more at scale, and so there definitely needs to be more of an intervention to prevent them from happening again in the future. So I appreciate your words on that. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to have some more questions with our candidate, including Medicare for all, some other topics that are happening on a more national basis. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the break, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us through this episode of Independent Thought. So before the break, you had mentioned the fact that you felt, progressive in how you feel about healthcare, that you are a believer in Medicare for all.
Hmm.
We had just lived through a pandemic, and obviously there was a scare with monkeypox, but like, even beyond just talking about a pandemic, prior to that, medical debt has been crushing people in this country. I think it's
Hmm.
the number one cause of bankruptcy in America continuously, and has
Right.
been for a long time now. There are a lot of people who are against universal health care. And when I talk to people who are conservative, a lot of their pushback is we don't want the government to be in control of healthcare. Like that's the main objection that I hear from, not from people in the media, but from people on the ground here in my state of Montana. When you are again talking to people about this issue, how do you approach it from a sense of, this system will be better than what we currently have? How do you project that message?
Right. I think sometimes for people on the left, or politicians who consider themselves progressive or even further, there's a tendency to want to, you know, basically, well, actually, someone and say, well, the government's always involved in your healthcare, which is true. There's Medicare, Medicaid, the VA, and the government, regulates every form of healthcare anyways, and you just want to say that. But I don't think that's a really. I think you can talk about that, but that's not where you should focus your message, where the government's always involved. I think the better thing to say is like, look, if I'm in the government, I can't necessarily take on the stress of you being sick. I can't. You're going to feel that no matter what. If you're sick, there's stress that comes with that. But what I can take on is the stress of medical debt, like you said, paying for this. And I think that's hugely important. It's saying that, look, let me do what I can, which is have you solely focus on your health, getting better, making sure that you're doing the right thing, you're taking medication, things like that. But let me take on the stress of how am I going to pay for this? Is this going to bankrupt my family? Is this going to tear my family apart? And so that's what I think people like to hear is that, look, I can, let me help in the way that I can. I think this is the best way to talk to Republicans, conservatives about that, because again, most people, even if they're conservative, don't benefit from a privatized healthcare system. If I'm talking to a hospital CEO or something like that, it might be a little different. But for the most part, people don't care like how it's paid for. They just want to get better. You say, look, I'll let me pay for it. We'll pay. We'll deal with that in the government side. You just focus on getting better. And that seems to resonate strongly with the vast majority of people, no matter what their political preference.
It's interesting about trying to find ways to bridge the gaps on these issues, right? You know, and obviously the universal healthcare issue is something that we're going to continue to talk about as time goes forward. But I think an issue where the gap has been closing over the years has been marijuana legalization.
Hmm.
And, I feel like there's still a little some hesitancy from some of those on the right. Obviously, I think the left is a lot more open to it, but we still see plenty of evidence of people on the right being very open towards it. I mean, we had states like Alaska, Arizona, I think South Dakota has, and these are fully legalized, and you have medical marijuana in I think 37 of the 50 states right now. And so as this trend continues to go forward, and I think states like Arkansas and Oklahoma and North Dakota have it on the ballot this year. It almost seems like an inevitable conclusion that we're going to get to nationwide legalization, but we're not there yet. And so
Hmm.
when you're talking to people in Kentucky about marijuana, like how do you come to that conversation, and what exactly do you tell people about why you think that marijuana should be legalized?
Yeah, it's a vastly important issue, and it's like you said, it's probably the most direct issue that seems to be changing. We could see it day to day. And you and I spoke before about how it's mostly a generational divide. How everyone who is, is younger than 40 seems to be okay with it. And I think the generational divide is plays a big factor in things like my opponent not voting for it, who's never voted for marijuana legalization. He's 84 years old. Um, and I also think it's important, it's interesting, like you said, some of the more conservative states that voted for legalization are some of the more rural states. Alaska, Arizona, places like that. Kentucky should be one of them. I just say, look, if you don't like to smoke marijuana, it's not for everyone. I'm not a fan of it. If you like to smoke it, then that's up to you. But I don't want to see your son or daughter go to jail and be involved in the cycle of the criminal justice system because they indulged in an intoxicant. Would you want uh, someone to go to jail just because they enjoy a beer or enjoy a glass of wine or a glass of whiskey? You should take proper precautions that people aren't behind the wheel and they're inebriated. But we have a system that's already does it with alcohol, and I think people get that. And I like you said, I think it's more of a generational divide. I don't sometimes I think that people overestimate the financial benefits, or they lead with the financial benefits of legalizing. And I think that's important. It's obviously will have some benefits. It depends on where it is, but I think the real thing is to say, like, look, it's a justice issue. It's someone enjoys an intoxicant. They're not doing anything dangerous. Let them enjoy that. And we also know that you know mar- marijuana criminalization, the history behind that, the racist history behind that. It was never really about public safety. But I think it's a generational divide. And as more young people get involved in politics, I think it's something that's naturally going to, it's an issue that's going to go away. And I fully support not just marijuana medical legalization, but marijuana recreational legalization and decriminalization.
It's I would hope that we're just on the downward, like path of making sure that there's just full legalization and there's just no going back from there. But obviously, until we get there, got to keep working towards that. But there are other issues that are going on, in the country right now that are, I guess, maybe a little less agreed on, they're very like relevant to this particular election. You're running in the 2022 election. This, seems to be a year where, at first we thought it was going to be a wave election for the Republicans. Now it seems like it might be coming a little bit back towards the center here as time has gone on over the summer with the Dobbs decision in particular. You know, the big issues right now seem to be, like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, inflation being as high as, humanly possible, and also things happening with Donald Trump, but we'll leave him off to the side for now.
Hmm.
When it comes to, let me talk about inflation for a second. This whole election was supposed to be based on that, up until the Supreme Court overturned Roe. Uh, when it comes to prices of everything going up, what is the government's role in trying to mitigate some of the pain that people are feeling? And when we're talking about the people in Kentucky, how do you pitch to them what we should be doing in order to fix what we're seeing with inflation right now?
Well, I think it's an interesting time for inflation. This election, I never thought that it was politically such a big deal. I mean, it was obvious that any sort of inflation was going to happen. We got into summer, and it was just after huge COVID you know lockdowns over the last couple years, and we live in a service economy. Kind of everything was placed in a position to where there was going to be inflation, but it was, as we're kind of seeing now, it's receding a lot. But I think that, again, I think sometimes people on the left, uh they do overlook um the fact that prices of bread and prices of gasoline, they affect most people's lives. I think the people on the right exploit that, and they're not speaking in good faith, but it is something that's an issue. So I think that if you allow people to live beyond just a razor's edge where a price change could uh, drastically affect their lives, that 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 helps them reduce kind of the impact of inflation. If we had policies to where, like I said, if your medical care is covered, if your transportation is covered, in Eastern Kentucky, in this district, people drive a very, very long ways away to get anywhere. So prices of gasoline is going to affect that. I think the government's role is to say, hey, I can make your life as based upon our country and our economic health and this and that, we can make your life a lot easier in a lot of ways. So when inflation does occur, because inflation occurs, it's not going to devastate you. Um, Again, like I said, I think that's with massive amounts of food subsidies and things like that, so where food prices don't drastically affect you, making sure that your health care is covered. I think by going bigger as a government, um, it can actually reduce some of the stressors that inflation has. And again, like I said, uh, inflation happens for a variety of reasons. The government can't always control that, nor would you want it to necessarily control it. But when it happens, you want to make sure people are comfortable enough to where, uh, price changes don't affect their lives this much.
Yeah, I mean, it is honestly, it's not a fair thing to say that like inflation like isn't having like a devastating toll on people. I think we feel that all over the place, especially in the housing market, for instance, as these prices have been rising all over the country. And honestly, there is a lot of different issues that we could talk about, but I kind of want to come to a close, like just basically on this. We've talked about a bunch of different issues here today, Connor, but is there one more issue in particular that you feel as though like the people of Kentucky aren't being like heard enough about, like maybe in a national sense, or an issue that's resonating more like within your state that, like maybe other people aren't aware of? Like what is a conversation that you're consistently having with people on the ground?
Well, I think that, besides Medicare for all and healthcare, and besides clean water, which I think is one of those issues that has impacted people beyond what the nation could understand. It really is the fact that, um, the government has in the past done a lot of things, and unions have done a lot of things for people in the state. My district, for as kind of as Republican as it is, just now, it used to be a Democratic stronghold, and that was because of Democrats' support for unions and labor rights. And I think that those labor rights, uh, you know, labor impacts cities a lot, but it also impacts a lot of rural areas. A lot of people in rural areas who aren't farmers, um, have experience with labor unions, and I think a full throated support of labor could not just help the Democrats politically, but help the country as a whole. Uh, and I think that a lot of people misunderstand that when they think of Kentucky. They may only think of, you know, it they only think of Kentucky as it is now, which again is very Republican in a lot of areas. But Kentucky has had a huge and very intricate labor history, and like I said, if we as I'm a Democrat, if me and the rest of the Democratic Party fully support labor and fully support labor unions, especially. Uh, it impacts a lot of people's lives beneficially, and people feel more comfortable, and they feel that sense of community that we're missing these days. So I think um, that's something that people don't realize about Kentucky.
Connor, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really do appreciate it. As a in closing, where can people find out more about you and your campaign online, and who are you running against, and why should they vote for you?
So my website is Conor, CONOR 4, like the number, Kentucky.com. You can find a lot about me there, and then I'm also active on Twitter and Facebook. If you type in my name, you'll find me on those sites. Yeah, real quickly, my opponent is Hal Rogers. He's been in office since 1981. He's 84 years old. They should vote for me for a whole bunch of reasons. If they feel that there should be, if they feel that Congress is too old, or they're too old fashioned, they should vote for me. If they feel like they want someone in Congress who actively supports, their lives, they should vote for me. If they want Medicare for all, they should vote for me. If they just want someone who's willing to take on the big risks and is not looking for any sort of personal reward. I'm just doing this because this is something that I want to do, and I feel that it's my duty. I've got the ability to run and represent the people of Eastern Kentucky, so I want to represent the people of Eastern Kentucky. My Real quickly, just my opponent is, let's just say, he's very good at keeping Eastern Kentucky as siloed as possible.
Right.
He wants a lot of control in that area. I don't want that. I want Eastern Kentucky to be as big and powerful and a part of the community and a part of the nation as possible. So that's why he would never vote for something like Medicare for all, because it takes power out of his hands and puts it into the people's hands. Um, so if you want to vote for me, if you want to see the people actually gain power, so that's what I would say.
Connor, thank you so much for coming on the show today. For everyone who is interested, those links that were just referenced will be in the episode description. So go ahead and just check out those links now, and they will be down there. If you are interested in helping out Connor, go to his website, check out some of his stuff. Thank you again for coming on the show, and we will see all of you in the next episode.
Thank you, Desmond. Appreciate it.